step for a little bit. I'm going to go slightly off center here. And what I want to do is I want to take a look at my little sample page here that I've created, and it's very ugly right now, and that's sort of by design, because what I want to do is gussy this up a little bit over the next handful of demos and kind of make this look the way that we want it to look. And by the way, if you're curious, there's a great little website, Bacon Ipsum, that's a lorem ipsum generator that uses all sorts of different meat products. You've got all of that there. There's all sorts of other ones out there. There's like a hipster ipsum. There's a vegetarian ipsum. So there's all sorts of different ipsum generators that are out there. This is just the one that I went with. But in any event, very, very, ugly. You'll notice that there is no formatting here, really, with the exception of my my little list up at the top here. And I would also mention, just kind of go in and highlight the HTML here, that what I did was I used HTML5. And for those of you not familiar with HTML5, HTML5, among other things, introduces a lot of semantic tags, where rather than saying this is how I want it to display, because that's the job of CSS, what we're going to do is describe the data that's contained inside of it. So that's our nav section, that's our navigation section. And there's an article, and then inside of my article, I've got two different sections inside of my article. And I really like the collapsible regions here. Kind of makes it a little bit easier to see. So we've got our nav section up top, we've got our article, we've got our article. Okay, now I am going to, and again, I'm doing this for simplicity's sake. And I don't want you to look at this and think, oh, well, he's sort of doing a do as I say, not as I do type thing, because I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to make my demos go a little bit easier. So you are going to notice that I'm not going to create a separate style file here. Should I? 100%. And if I was doing this in production, I would 100% have a separate file for this. But because of the fact that I want the ability to show the HTML and the style very easily, I want the ability to bounce back and forth between the style section and that HTML and be able to make those quick little changes. It's going to be easier for demos if I just put the style here. So don't hate me because I'm putting the style inside the HTML page. I know this is not best practice. This is just going to make the demos easier. Okay. By the way, one little side note. People have asked about this little sidebar over here. This is one of the cool little features inside scroll. There we go. Yeah, so you'll notice under scroll bars here, just type up top scroll bars. Let me just click on that. That over there, you have the ability to set up the bar mode, which is the classic, or you've got map mode, and that gives you that little bar right there. So that way I can go in and mouse over and actually see what's inside of there. And that's a cool little feature inside of 2013. Okay. In any event, let's go back to my little page, and what you're going to notice is right up at the very top, I've got my navigation section. So of course I've got a bunch of anchor tags inside of there, and I want to style those. So maybe I want to make them bold, and maybe I want to take away the underline that's on them. So maybe those are the two things that I want to be able to do to that. Well, that's perfect for navigation, because if I'm looking at a page and I see the navigation section, what am I expecting inside of a navigation section? I'm expecting links. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't need that visual clue of an underline. But if I'm looking at an article, I'm going to need something that's going to be some form of a visual clue, and maybe that's an underline, maybe that's a different font color, or something like that. So long and short is the links that I'm going to have in an article, I probably want to look a little bit different than the ones that I have over here. All right, well, how can I tackle that? Well, one way that I could potentially tackle that, since we know we're not going to be able to just simply say A and apply that to all anchor tags, because that's going to apply globally, so we can't do that. One way that I could do this is I could create one class here for my nav section, and then another class over here. But that's going to become a little bit of a pain, because I'm going to have to remember to always put that class in again and again and again and again. And when you start talking about things like Bootstrap, I'm going to bring up Bootstrap again, which is very class driven, you're going to find that you've got a little bit of HTML and a ton of class mentions. So if we can do something without having to always add in a class, that's going to make our lives easier. So that way we don't have to remember to always put it into there. We've got a lot less clutter on our page, and we're able to say, based on the document structure, this is how we want something to look. On top of that, if I later move something from one spot to another somewhere on my page, because of the fact that we're using those pseudo elements, those pseudo classes, or the document structure selectors, it's automatically going to pick up that style based on where I put it. So really a better way to do things. So let's start off by taking a look at how we can identify things based on document structure. So let's take a look at a little bit of CSS here. And let's talk about our parent-child and our containers. Now inside of CSS, on the selector, if I say class and class, so nav A, for example, what I'm saying is I'm looking for an anchor tag anywhere inside of that nav element. So I've got a nav element, inside of there there's an anchor, and it's only going to apply to an anchor that's inside of a nav bar. If, however, I add in that little angle bracket, and it's subtle, but it makes a huge difference, then the anchor tag must be a direct child of, in this case, nav. I think the best way to do it is to see it.
Yeah.
Let's get in and actually dig into it. Okay. So let me open up my little nav section here, and here's my little style, and I'm going to start off by doing this the incorrect way. And I sort of like starting with the incorrect way, and that way we can see, wait a minute, nothing happened, and then we go back and make it work. So remember that with that little angle bracket, what that's going to mean is it has to be a direct child. And if we take a look at our structure here, what we're going to notice, there's all of our anchor tags. Those are obviously not direct children of nav, because they're all inside of li, all inside of ul. List item, unordered list, and then nav. So this is not going to work. So if I go in and I say text decoration, none, and I say font, weight, and let's say bold, what you're going to notice is if I do have my browser? There it is. Perfect. Let's go ahead and hit refresh, and you're going to notice no change because that angle. So if I take that away, and now I save and I come back over here and I hit refresh, now you're going to notice everything is bold, and you're also going to notice that all of my underlines are gone. By the way, I'm going to do this real quick as well. Just going to globally apply this font family, and let's use a Verdana. I think that's just going to make things a little bit easier. There we go. I think that looks a little bit better.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of serif fonts on screen, just ever.
Okay, perfect. All right. So this makes you much happier then?
Yes.
Okay.
But I wasn't going to say anything otherwise.
All right. I appreciate that.
I'm polite.
And I appreciate that. Okay. So what you're going to notice here is that now my underlines are gone, and now it's bold, again because of that space rather than the angle bracket. So let me just kind of put in the comment here. Space is going to be contained inside of element, and let me just also put in a comment right here is that the angle bracket indicates a direct parent-child relationship. There we go. And again, we will be sharing all of this out on GitHub. I'll go in and check all of those, and we'll put the links into the chat window, because I know everybody's probably wondering where they can go get all of this. All right, cool. So there's very kind of simple, based on where it happens to be, we want to go in and highlight things. And that's good, and that's perfect for things like this. But you know, let's come back over to our little section over here, and maybe what we want to be able to do on the text is maybe we want to be able to highlight kind of the first letter, or maybe we want to be able to highlight the first paragraph and then use a different font down below and things like that. And fortunately, we can go in and clean all of that up. I am going to do one real quick thing, only just because it's bothering me. Heather's going to talk about this a little bit later, but I am just going to do padding bottom, and let me just do 20 pixels. There we go. That it was really bugging me. I needed a little bit of space there.
No, I get it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Back to our slides. Cool. So like I said, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to identify, for example, the first letter, or the first paragraph, or the first block, or maybe based on something being highlighted. That is where pseudo classes and pseudo elements come into play. Now, the difference between a pseudo class and a pseudo element is very subtle, syntax, and both just sort of semantically, technically. That a pseudo class is going to apply to an entire element. And that's based on where that element is, or based on the current state. So if somebody has put their mouse over it, if somebody has highlighted it, actually highlighted isn't right, but if somebody's put their mouse over it, if it's at the top, if it's at the bottom, if it's the last item, if it's an odd item, if it's an even item, etc., all of that is where pseudo classes come into play. So rather than me explicitly having to say dot and then the name of a class, and then inside of HTML saying class equals, it's going to be based on something about that element. So for example, it might be the first item in the hierarchy. So maybe we want to bump up the font size just a little bit on the first paragraph, and then a slightly smaller font on everything else. Or maybe for the last item, that we know the last item that's going to be down at the very bottom, it's going to be inside of a div tag, but we know that that's where our copyright is going to be, so maybe we want to make that smaller. Then we can go in and do that. Or maybe we want to apply a style if it happens to be the only child. So maybe this is a search results page, and what we want to display is, sorry, no results found, and we want that to appear with a particular type of font. We can do all of that with pseudo classes. So pseudo classes are all based on something about that element, based on where it is or based on what's going on. So it could be based on position. So first child, last child, the nth child inside of its particular parent. By the way, the nth child, you will notice, will actually take a number, or you can also use the text odd and even. Now, for anybody who's been programming HTML for a little while, you're probably all familiar with having to go in and try to set something up for that, that different shading for odd or for even. There, problem solved. Odd, even, done. So much easier. Okay, and then you'll also notice that we've got position and type. And this one really, I think, is subtle. I don't want to use the word confusing, but it definitely is subtle. And here's the way that this is going to work. Let me, there we go, do this. Let's say I said div colon first of type, and then I set, whatever my style happened to be, and then let's up here say that I said div and I said first child, like this. There we go. All right, so what's the difference between me saying first child and me saying first of type? It's a great question. And the answer is that first of type is going to be based on where that div tag is on the entire page. So it's the absolute first div tag. Contrast that with first child. First child is going to be based on its parent container. And let's do this. Let's go back into Visual Studio here. I think this is going to be sort of an easier way to to drill into this. So let's open up my couple little sections here, and we'll leave it like this. Okay, so what I want you to notice is there is my little section in a div tag, and there is my little section in a div tag. Now in both of these cases here, these both are first child. The reason that they're both first child is because they're both the first child of that section element. So they're the first div tag inside of that section. So if I wanted to do something with the first paragraph in each section, I can now do that. But this one right here also happens to be the first of type. Why? Because it's the first div tag that appears anywhere on my page. So first child, based on the parent, first of type, first time that that thing appears anywhere. Now, for me, in my personal experience, I generally don't find myself using first of type all that often, but I do find myself using last of type periodically. And again, it's for that little section down at the very bottom. So that way, if you've got, you know, all of your little links about, you know, now hiring and about us and the copyright and all of that, and that's contained inside of a div, and you know that that's always going to be at the end, that's perfect. That way you can just simply say last of type, and I know that that's always going to be the case. In fact, here, let's just go in and we'll add that right in. Let me just add in a div right down here, and now hiring. And whatever it is that we want to do. Okay, so let's go in and style all of that. So here's what I want to do, is I want to bump up the font size just a little bit of the initial paragraphs, and I want to make that bottom section, let's just say red, just to kind of make it very, very obvious there. Okay, and let me also, I'm just going to say font size, and I'm going to say 16 pixels. And let me see, how's that going to look here? Okay, that's perfect actually. Excellent. All right. So now let me go in and I want to grab first paragraph of each section. And if you remember, our paragraphs are currently set up as div tags. Okay. So I'm going to say div, colon, and then you'll notice I've got first child. And then I can just say curly brace, and now I can say font size, and let's go ahead and make that 20 pixels, which is probably bigger than we would really want it, but I'm trying to make it really obvious here. So first child, and now let's come back over here, let's hit refresh, and now you'll notice that's nice and big, and let's scroll down, there's our second paragraph, our third paragraph, our fourth paragraph, and our fifth paragraph in that section. And then you'll notice once again, big. Now let me update the text. I think that's also going to make it a little bit more obvious here. So let's just go in and say first in section, scroll on down, and first in section. And now let's come back over here, hit refresh, and then you'll notice that that one is nice and big. Scroll on down, small, 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 and then again, nice and big. You're looking at me like you have a question.
Could you scroll up in the code? Why is it that, so what is the first child of div?
Okay, so that's a great question, because that's sort of the way that it reads, that it looks like it's saying, I'm looking for the first child of the div tag, but it's not. So what a pseudo class or pseudo element applies to is to the tag in question. So I'm not looking for a child of div. I'm looking for div, and I'm trying to see what it's a child of. So that's a great question, because when you look at it, and I did that too when I first looked at this, when I was first learning this, is that I looked at that and I said, wait a minute, is this looking for the first child inside of div? It's not. It's looking at the div tag and looking at the structure of the div tag. So it's not looking at the contents of the div tag, it's looking at the div tag itself and seeing, is it the first child of something? So great question, great question. Okay, now let's also go in and say div, and I'm going to say last of type, And then let's just go in and say color colon blue. And let's say font size, and let's make that, 12 pixels. Okay. And now let's again come back, hit refresh. And now what you're going to notice, you weren't supposed to do that. Ha! You're not supposed to do it that way. All right, in any event, it's actually putting it on the section, which it's not supposed to do. It's supposed to be on the page itself. So this is just sort of making a liar out of me. See, we're really cooking on this show. Live demos. Live demos right here in front of you.
We told you guys CSS is finicky, and this is one of the cases.
Exactly. All right. So in any event, so last of type is supposed to be the last of that item. I'm just going to make that go away for right now. That's really weird. I'll have to go back and work with that later. We're really cooking here. All right. In any event, so what I want you to notice, just to kind of review this, is that this allows me to, again, based on the document structure, do something different with it, which is cool. Now, I did one little thing inside of my Visual Studio here, and that is I hit Control-K, Control-D. Two-part shortcut, Control-K, Control-D, which formats the document. One of the things that you're going to notice about CSS is that this is going to get very big very quickly. And so formatting becomes a very important component. And so you'll notice there's my div, and then there is a pseudo class for div. And so you'll notice that that is tabbed in, and that is a best practice. So whatever you want globally, and then all of the pseudos you're going to want tabbed in. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. Back to slides. There we go. Now, how about, rather than based on document structure, how about element state, based on what's going on? So maybe we want something to look different if you've clicked on it. Then maybe we want to bold it, like a checkbox. Or maybe if you hover over something, then we want to put the underline back onto it. Because if I go back to my page here, and let's just go all the way back up to the very top, we're going to notice there's our nav section. Okay, that's all, peachy keen, hunky-dory. But, it still would be really, really nice if we could make that more obvious, that that's a link. So when you put your mouse over it, it'd be nice to see an underline, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sure enough, we can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say nav a colon and then hover. Hover, of course, just like the JavaScript. You hover over something. That's going to be when the mouse is over it. And then let's go ahead and say text decoration, and let's say underline. Cool. Save. Let's come back over here. Let's hit refresh. And now you're going to notice when I put my mouse over it that sure enough, we get those little underlines. So now I can clearly say, oh, look, okay, that is, in fact, a link. Cool. Now, let's come back over here real quick. And I want to highlight one other thing. So again, you're going to notice that the syntax colon in my pseudo class there. But you are going to notice that I can still go in and use everything else that I've used. So if you remember, that space, of course, means contained inside of an element. So this is now going to say that this is only going to apply to an anchor tag when somebody mouses over it, and that anchor tag is inside of a nav section. So you can get as explicit as you want when going in and defining those elements and how you want everything to look inside of a page. Cool. All right. Now, how about maybe finding the first letter or the first line of something? Or how about going in and doing something different based on selection? Because, I don't know about you, but I've never been a huge fan of the blue background white text. Would it be nice to kind of do a yellow highlight? I mean, really, when you think about highlighting, what do you think of?
a highlighter.
Absolutely.
It's funny because this is something Chris really, really cares about. He made me change the highlighting in Visual Studio yesterday to yellow.
That's a true story. I did in fact do that. Yes. See, it has to be yellow. All right. Everybody has their thing.
Yeah.
Okay. But in any event, so I want to make that yellow. Now, let's compare and contrast here. So when I hover over those little links, I'm hovering over the entire link, so that entire element. And if you remember, classes apply to element, so that's a pseudo class. If I highlight a section like I've done here, I've highlighted a portion of an element. So not the entire element, just a portion of the element. If we're going to be talking about first line, which is just going to be that right there, that's just that first line. So again, it's a portion of an element. So a pseudo element is where we're actually going to be creating an element on the fly. Now look, I know some of you are probably thinking, wow, that really seems to be, kind of splitting hairs. That's really kind of a semantic argument. And I'm with you. I generally don't focus too much on pseudo class versus pseudo element. The syntax is slightly different. You are going to notice that it's going to be a single colon versus a double colon. But here's the thing. With Visual Studio, if you hit a colon, it's automatically going to show you all of the pseudo classes, 1 colon, and all of the pseudo elements, 2 colons, right there. So if you don't want to have to worry about trying to remember whether or not something was, 2 colons or 1 colon, you don't have to worry about it. Just, let Visual Studio kind of do its thing. And if you don't want to have to remember the little debate about, pseudo elements versus pseudo classes, that's fine. You don't have to. That's the good news. Okay. Let's do a demo here. So let me go back in and let's go grab our little div tags and let's go in and say div, and I am going to do our selection, and you'll notice that I typed in colon and selection. So I didn't even type in the second colon, but again, the IntelliSense still works. So let's go ahead and take advantage of that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say color colon black, and I'm going to say background color colon yellow. There we go. And then let's also go in and say div colon, and I'm going to say my first letter, and let's go in and let's say font size, and let's make this nice and big. So let's say 36 pixels. And let's go in and say div first line. There we go. And let's go in and say font size, and let's make that 24. Let's also kind of make it a little bit more obvious as well. Let's go in and say font color. Oh, it's not font color. I knew I was going to do that eventually as well. And let's just make that green. Okay. 24 pixels. Cool. So now, if I come back over here to Visual Studio and I hit refresh, here's what I want you to notice. Is you're going to notice, sure enough, that first line is green. And you're going to notice that that first character is nice and big. And you're also going to notice, there we go, yellow background. See, that makes me happy when I go in and I select it. But my browser and all of that is set currently to full screen. So my first line is going from here to here. Okay, fine. But how about if I were to go in and I were to resize this? You'll notice that when I resize this, that it's still just that first line. There's no JavaScript here. None whatsoever. This is all based on CSS. And in fact, when we get into a later module, one of the things that I'm going to talk about is really try to avoid JavaScript. If you can get CSS to do it, let CSS do it. That's going to make your life that much easier. Okay. In any event, let me also do this real quick. Yeah.
So when Christopher was highlighting, you might have noticed that the first letter was still blue when he selected it, but everything else was yellow. And
Keep talking.
And that's because, as we said before, it's what you select. What was the phrase that you used? The last...
Oh, last right.
Last right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you'll see in the code that the selection is being used before, or I guess this is much better to say. The first child is set after the selection is set.
Right.
So